Hey there, I'm Reverend Jim Keat. This is The Whole Bible, the show where we talk about the entire Bible, story by story, bit by bit, chapter by chapter. We are in Genesis chapter 27 through 30. We have made it to a new character. His name is Jacob. Now, we last week talked about Isaac. Before that, we talked about Abraham. We are in this long kind of connection of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Next comes Joseph, one of Jacob's many sons. We'll get to them in a minute, maybe more next week. But really, you could say that this lineage of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph should be called Abraham, Isaac, Trickster, and Joseph, because this story is all about a trickster named Jacob. Jacob actually means trickster, supplanter. That's what the word means, the name means. And I wonder, was he just living up to his name? Or do we have all these stories about a trickster, and in hindsight, we named the character Jacob, Trickster. Okay, so let's dive into it. We got 4 chapters here, chapter 27, 28, 29, 30, and I look at these as 4 tricks. So our main character, Jacob, is a trickster, so it makes sense that there are tricks happening all around. Some of the tricks he does, some of the tricks are done to him. Let's get into it. Chapter 27, this is the first trick, blessing. This is the one where Rebekah and Jacob collaborate to secure the blessing that was intended for Esau. Remember last week we talked about Jacob and Esau when the whole birthright sale happened? This is a little more serious. Birthright and blessing, 2 different things. Birthright is kind of like you are entitled to the land and the property. Blessing is this prosperity passed from generation to generation, firstborn to firstborn. The blessing of Abraham, you'll be blessed to be a blessing. It's that kind of spiritual descendancy. And in their kind of mind, they're both important, but the blessing is kind of the through line we're following in this story. So Rebekah, Jacob work together to trick their way into the blessing intended for Esau. They work within and they subvert a patriarchal system that favored the firstborn, which was Esau. He came out just by an arm. They're twins, by the way. And this story reveals both the cost of deceit and the persistence of God's promise through unexpected channels. Because you think, wait, why would God go through with giving the blessing to the trickster, the one who steals the blessing? Doesn't God have something to say about thou shalt not steal? We'll get to that in quite a bit. We're not to Exodus yet. But no, apparently God's like, blessings on the trickster. Way to go, Jacob, for being resourceful. We don't really know, but the story tells us that this first trick has Jacob pretending to be his brother, literally putting on his clothes and animal fur to make his smooth skin feel more rough and hair like his brother, and making his dad's favorite food while Big Brother was out hunting for it still. His dad, who's blind and can't see very well, is like, come closer so I know that it's you. Oh, what are these big teeth? Better that I might eat you with. Red Riding Hood. I'm messing up my stories now, aren't I? Okay, but you get the idea. There's a lot going on here, and there's a lot of tricking going on here, and it ends with Jacob getting the blessing. Esau comes back just as the moment it happens and is like, what? And that's where the next chapter comes. Chapter 28, the second trick is a rock. Wait, what? This is a rock? Just hold with me for a second. Jacob flees for his life and he encounters God in a dream. Hearing a soundtrack written by Led Zeppelin sounds something like this. Yeah, this is the Stairway to Heaven. This is a reaffirmation of the ancestral promise despite his flawed actions. This is kind of a promise of that blessing. The place where you are in the midst of your running from your brother, afraid for your life. God is with you in this moment. So the vision of this Stairway to Heaven portrays a God who is present in places of vulnerability, displacement, and fear. So the trick is Jacob finds God under a rock, the most ordinary of places, the running for your life at the end of your rope, no choices left. He's leaving his family and going back to his mom's family, Uncle Laban, which is where Abraham and them all originally came from. So we got a lot of, back and forth going on in these narratives here. And he's heading back to hang out with Uncle Laban because he's afraid for his life. And in this moment, he's reminded that even in this space of desperation and despair, God's still with him. So the second trick is a rock. Third trick. The third trick is the wives. This is where some tricks get played on Jacob again. Jacob meets Rachel, Laban's second daughter, and he is in love. He wants to marry her. But Laban says, okay, you got to work for me for 7 years first. So there's a bit of exploitation going on here. And then we got some deceit, some trickery, kind of like the switcheroo that Jacob pulled on Dad back in the previous chapter. Now, at the wedding day, Laban, surprise, takes Leah to be the bride instead of Rachel. Because in this culture, you got to marry the firstborn before you marry the secondborn. So Laban's like, dude, marry my first daughter, and then 7 years later, you can marry my second daughter. Wait, what? What a story. So, marries the firstborn daughter, still in love with the second daughter, works 7 more years, and then marries the second daughter. And now there's a lot going on here. Leah and Rachel, these 2 sisters, are navigating their own struggles for love, for dignity, and for children, because in this society, sadly, a woman's worth was largely indicative upon the children she has, so the lineage can continue, and specifically sons that she has, so the blessing can be passed down yet again. That's what we'll get to in the next chapters. So this chapter gives us this wife swap, a trick played on Jacob, and it really reveals the burdens placed on women in these patriarchal structures. There's a lot going on the page that we can notice when we take a closer look. And then one more chapter, one more trick. This 4th trick is sheep. There's a couple things going on here. Leah, Rachel, and their servants are engaging in this competition for children and social status, negotiating survival within a system stacked against them. That whole thing continues from the previous chapter. And at the same time, Jacob, he's growing in wealth. Remember, he got the blessing of God. So his stuff just keeps stuffing. And Laban is a little suspicious. How come that this kid who's marrying all my daughters and is working for me ends up getting all the best of everything? So they do this little sheep trick. And here, we'll watch a video in a minute. Well, I'll explain it a little bit better. And it really shows how blessings emerge even amid economic injustice and manipulation. Doesn't always seem like the math is going to lead to where you'd think it would go, at least not in a story all about a trickster. So that's a blitz of an overview through these 4 chapters. But now let's take a slower look, 1 minute at a time with each of them. You're going to hear from Reverend Charlene Wingate. You'll hear from me. You'll hear from Reverend Mira Swalani. And then, once again, from me. So let's listen in to these 4 summaries of these 4 chapters.
Bible in a minute. Genesis 27. This is the story where Jacob goes to great lengths to deceive his father Isaac in order to acquire the blessing rightfully meant for his elder twin brother Esau. Jacob and Esau's mother Rebekah overheard Isaac telling Esau, "Behold, I am old. I do not know the day of my death," which is biblical time's way of saying, "Listen carefully, I'm about to die." With the help of his mother, Jacob was successful in tricking his father Isaac into blessing him. Blessing in that time was a solemn declaration that transfers property rights and the authority of the father to the one receiving the blessing. It was effectively a will, only instantaneous and irreversible. To give a blessing in that time was final. This passage often raises questions about morality. Why does it seem as though Jacob is rewarded for his trickery? And does this mean that it is okay for us to be deceitful and manipulative to get what we want in life? Before we run with that thought, though, it might be a good idea to read the rest of Jacob's story to see just how complicated life can be.
Bible in a minute. Genesis chapter 28. Jacob is on his way to his uncle Laban. He stops for the night and finds a rock for a pillow. Interesting choice. And has a Led Zeppelin-inspiring dream of a stairway to heaven. He wakes up to realize what's been true all along, only he's been too preoccupied to even notice. He says, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it." The earth is the Lord's and everything in it, rocks and seas and skies and trees, and when we open our eyes, we just might begin to notice God in all of it, even under a rock, like Jacob did.
Bible in a minute, chapter 29. Jacob is tricked by his uncle Laban. You see, he had the hots for Laban's daughter, Rachel, and made a deal with his uncle that he would work for 7 years in exchange for Rachel's hand in marriage. 7 years pass, and after all the wedding festivities, Laban double-crosses Jacob, sending his unwedded, older, and less attractive daughter, Leah, to bed Jacob on his wedding night, instead of Rachel. I don't know how, but Jacob doesn't notice until the next morning. Furious, he then has to work another 7 years so that he can marry Rachel, the one he loved more. But the real victim in this story is not Jacob. It is Leah, who is left feeling unloved and rejected by the men in her life. Let this story be a challenge for us to examine the ways in which we harm women when we reduce their value to their looks or their fertility.
Bible in a minute, Genesis chapter 30. Jacob is a trickster. We see Jacob ready to leave his uncle Laban. They work out a deal where Jacob gets to take all the spotted, speckled, and black sheep and goats, leaving Laban with the coveted pure white livestock, and they separate the flocks by a 3 days journey. And then this is where things get really interesting. Jacob takes fresh poplar and almond rods and peels white streaks into them, exposing the white of the rods, and then when the stronger of the flock come to the troughs to drink and breed, he places them in front of the sheep, which of course makes them produce offspring that are striped, speckled, and spotted, because, yeah, that's how animal breeding works, right? And all of this led to Jacob's unwanted flock growing larger and stronger than his uncle's pure and white flock. Now, this is obviously a legendary story that has Jacob living up to his name as the Trickster, but it also shows us how these stories are crafted in hindsight, an embellished retelling of our past to make meaning of where we've ended up. And if we're honest, that's what we tend to do with most of our memories. All right, as always, the first thing is what stands out to you? What do you notice? Notice what you notice. That's a good practice, not only when you're reading the Bible, but just in life in general. And then here's 3 specific questions that might lead us in a little bit deeper as well. First, what do these chapters suggest about how blessing, power, or privilege are distributed in families and societies? What do they say about who has it, who takes it, how you have it, how it manifests? There's a lot going on in that theme. Second one, what does it mean that God meets Jacob not in a holy place, but in the wilderness? Jacob's on the run. He's in the wilderness. He's between civilization, and he's sleeping on a rock. And that's where he hears this Stairway to Heaven song and meets God. And lastly, what does it mean that blessing unfolds not through idealized situation, but through struggle, negotiation, and persistence? It's not just like #blessed, it all works out, but we see a lot of struggle, a lot of negotiation, and a whole lot of persistence making this blessing turn into something. There you go. A little bit of things to think about. We'll be back next week with Jacob Part 2. We got chapters 31 through 36 coming up next, so stick with me next week. We'll dive into that. And Genesis is coming to an end. There's only 3 more videos I'm going to make after this, so buckle up. We're coming to the finish line, and I'll talk to you on the next one.